Views expressed on this program are those of the hosts, guests, and callers, and are not necessarily those of this station, its management, or other advertisers. You're listening to Transformation Talk Radio.
Moms, are you ready to become enlightened, empowered, and stress-free? Well, get ready because you are about to tune into vibrant, powerful moms helping everyday women create an extraordinary life with Debbie Pokornik. Each week, Debbie discusses topics to help you become self-aware, inspired, and on track to create the life you crave. It's time to stop settling and start thriving. And it all begins now on Transformation Talk Radio.
Welcome to the Vibrant Powerful Mom Show. I'm your host, Debbie Pokornik, and today I want to share 5 secrets about using discipline that are rarely discussed, yet super important if you want to be able to choose discipline over punishment. This is an important topic for you to be aware of because it can influence your effectiveness as a parent. It can affect your confidence, which of course is connected to your vibrancy, and it can even affect your relationship with all kinds of other people, including your child. Many parents make the decision to use discipline with their child only to discover they keep slipping up. Maybe they find that despite their best efforts to stay calm and consistent, they often overreact, flipping back into practices they promised they would never ever use on their child, and then feeling guilty and ashamed at what they've done. Or maybe they've decided to use discipline, but they find that their kids don't listen to them most of the time. And maybe their partner or their mother, quite often it's their mother-in-law, will tell them that the problem is they're just too soft or inconsistent. Discipline is not soft. It's actually much harder to do than punishment. And I talked about this in much greater detail in a recent podcast. But it does require self-awareness, training, and adjustments to what you have already internalized from your own from your own youth as well as from society at large. As a result of this kind of judgment and flip-flopping back and forth, the mom who's trying to discipline can often feel her vibrancy slipping. She blames her own lack of self-discipline as the problem and fears that others are going to find out. She might feel like her child is running the show and often feel unsupported by others around her. This is tough on her self-esteem, her ability to be a great parent, and her relationship with her child. Now, in reality, this problem is way more common than any of us would ever dream. It happens for 5 reasons that people rarely talk about, never mind help us to overcome. Once you're aware of these reasons and begin to recognize them when they arise, this troublesome way of thinking can stop and the real learning can begin. So if you're a parent, a teacher, a daycare worker, or a coach of young kids, and you're trying to use discipline rather than punishment, then this podcast is for you. Now, in a very recent episode, I talked about the difference between discipline and punishment. If you haven't listened to that and you aren't sure how to differentiate between these two things, you might want to check that out as well. 5 secrets to discipline. Secret number 1. Discipline is about awakening and strengthening your child's moral code and not about calling all the shots. So when you use discipline, you're not giving your child a list of what's okay to do and what is not. Instead, you're trying to help him internalize a way of living that will guide him in making good decisions throughout his life. Whether you are there to enforce things or not, he's still going to have this strong sense of right or wrong. So it's about helping your child become independent and confident in his uniqueness so that he can embrace whatever life throws his way and grow to his full potential. In other words, discipline is about helping your child stay firmly connected to his natural state of resiliency, which is an important part of living life to the fullest. In fact, you're trying to teach him a moral code that your child can use in all kinds of decisions in the future. And there's two very important things that you need to know about this. First of all, discipline is taught more through what you do than what you say. This means how you behave must back up the skills that you're hoping your child will internalize. The good news is that you control you. So, while it might not seem fair that your kids learn more from what you do than all the wonderful things that you say to them, it still allows you some choice about the behaviors that you're promoting. It's also good to note that most of this modeling is absorbed in the younger years because the teenage years are more about living it than learning it. So in the younger years, your parent power, which I refer to as the magic wand of parenting, is still firmly in place, and it can be used as backup when your child isn't listening and you really, really need them to. So if your modeling and your message are consistent in the younger years and you're not abusing your magic wand of parenting, you can create a strong foundation for your child to use as they get older. The bad news is nobody is self-disciplined all the time. You will have moments when your actions contradict what you're trying to teach, which you can bet your kids will notice and they'll grab onto it. If you misuse your power on a regular basis and or model behaviors that you don't want to see from your kids, things can get rough, especially in those teenage years. So even though you might believe your focus needs to be on noticing and fixing your child's mistakes, in a disciplined family, it's really your own behaviors that will take up most of your energy. The second thing you need to know about this moral code is that discipline will not always stop your child from behaving in ways you find unacceptable. You're teaching him how to think, not what to think. A moral code is like a personal sounding board that your teen will run things by to determine whether or not he feels they're acceptable. Now, just because you disagree with something and feel it is bad behavior doesn't mean your child will come to the same conclusion, especially when they're right in the rebellion of those teenage years. And it's worth it to note, of course, using brain-altering substances like alcohol or drugs can certainly affect their ability to make good decisions based on a sound moral code. That's true for them and for adults, anybody who imbibes. Now, that aside, although you certainly have a say in the boundaries your child must abide by while he's living with you, he will develop his own opinions, and that might result in a code of conduct that's quite different from yours. The benefit of using discipline is that your child will not feel a need to strike out at you or your beliefs, but instead will respectfully disagree. That is the difference between enjoying those teenage years and not, let me tell you. True discipline is largely based on the notion of unconditional love, which means accepting and loving others despite those differences. So not being able to call all the shots as your child gets older can be a really big challenge for a lot of parents to accept, but it is a necessary one if you want to use discipline. Secret number 2, discipline will always be harder to do than punishment. Bummer, I know. Since the only way you can truly teach self-discipline is to model it yourself, you need to be the bigger person. Even when your child is pushing your buttons, embarrassing you, and behaving in ways you believe are totally inappropriate. Now, if this sounds easy, you might want to listen to it again. When people push your buttons, when they're testing you, when they're making you feel like other people are looking and judging you as not measuring up, oh my gosh, it's not an easy place to be. So being calm, clear, and self-controlled when you really want to yell, stamp your feet, and ultimately get your way is challenging. This does not mean that you have to be perfect. That's actually never our goal, but it does mean that it's going to be very hard for your child to internalize a message of self-control if you have trouble modeling it. So becoming aware of your own triggers and learning tricks to help you protect your button in times of need can be very helpful for the disciplined parent. the higher road will always be the more challenging path, but it doesn't have to be totally unpleasant, especially when you focus on all of the good that can come from this extra effort. What's pretty amazing about using discipline with your child is that it allows you to look at things from another person's point of view. And sometimes when you do this, you'll realize that your child actually has things to teach you rather than it just being a one-way street. Another factor that makes discipline harder than punishment is that a correction using discipline is aimed at guiding, encouraging, and strengthening our kids. This means your child might not look sad and bothered by your correction. Oh my gosh, this is very challenging for many parents since we've been taught that our displeasure should result in the offender's discomfort. So if you believe that a person can't happily learn a lesson, then discipline is going to be a very hard path for you to stay on. I remember this father at one of my sessions where we were talking about parenting tools, and all of a sudden he blurted out with great force, "Timeouts don't work." Everything stopped, and I took a moment and I said, "Oh, please don't tell my kids because I've used them effectively for years." He relaxed a little bit and laughed. So I asked him, "Why do you feel it doesn't work?" "My 3-year-old was not listening and she wouldn't stop making faces at her little brother. So finally I had had enough. I told her she needed a timeout and I took her to the spot on the couch that we use. I set the timer for 3 minutes. I walked back into the kitchen and moments later, I can hear her singing. She wasn't upset at all." "Well, what would you have liked her to do for those 3 minutes?" I asked. "I don't know. Cry or at least look sad. She should feel bad that she's in timeout. She shouldn't be happily singing." This father had fallen into the punishment trap. To him, you should feel bad when you're corrected or you weren't learning anything. His 3-year-old singing felt disrespectful to him, almost as if she was rudely telling him to shove it. "So what did you do?" I asked him. "I told her to stop singing and look sad or she was going to get a spanking. That shut her up." Now, as the father finished these words, you could hear a pin drop in that room. I waited for a moment, and all of a sudden he made this kind of and all of a sudden he made this noise that was kind of like this snort of embarrassment. Oh my God. So there I am, 6'3", 260 pounds, towering over my sweet little 3-year-old daughter who means the world to me. And I'm losing it just because she's singing instead of looking sad. How can my 3-year-old be the bigger person? He laughed. We laughed with him. And we launched into a really great discussion about protecting your trigger points, figuring out what it is that you're really wanting from your child, like in this case, to look sad, and remembering the difference between punishment and discipline. Secret number 3, most of us have a punishment default. Now, this actually came up in that previous podcast. So by now, it's not really a secret anymore, but it's definitely worth discussing further. Even though you might have been raised in a family that rarely resorted to punishment, being raised in a society that is very punishment focused has taken its toll on all of us. Our legal system, our recreational system, and even our educational system are based on punitive strategies to gain compliance. While this thinking is slowly changing and being recognized as ineffective, unless you have been raised away from these systems or have made a conscious effort to change your programming, your default will be set to punishment. For parents, this means punishment tools and the delivery model for using punishment will be firmly established in their parenting pack. In other words, punishment will always be within easy reach, and even your positive tools can be used in a punitive way. This typically results in guilt, confusion, frustration, disappointment. If you're a parent who really wants to do things differently, but find that their default keeps kicking in. I clearly remember one of the times that this happened to me. I was working with a group of grade 5 and 6 students at a small school, and our goal was to help them acquire some very important life skills, which we were doing by offering to train them as playground helpers. Now, I felt like I had created a really fun program that allowed for lots of interaction as well as interesting content. But on that particular Friday afternoon, the kids didn't seem to be feeling it. They kept talking to each other, they're laughing and interrupting my stellar content delivery. Now, I knew that we were running out of time for this program. We were coming to the end. There were some things that I really wanted to cover. And it felt to me like these kids had slowly been getting more and more disrespectful or louder, I guess, just not paying attention. So I could feel my frustration level rising. I had this bell, and I would use this bell to get their attention anytime an activity ended. It's actually a meditation bell, so it reverberates. It doesn't get louder, but it just continues to move through the room, and it tends to be really good at getting people's attention. And so I had already used it a few times that afternoon to try to get them to stop talking, and I still found myself talking over these unruly kids. So I had the typical feeling of frustration where my body's getting all tight. And before I even thought things through, I picked up this little bell and I hit the mallet that comes with it as hard as I could on the musical rod. And then as I stood there with this little mallet was actually vibrating in my hand because I had hit it so hard, I thought, oh no, did I break it? I felt myself flush with embarrassment. But you know what? The kids totally ignored the bell. They didn't even notice. And so my embarrassment really quickly morphed into anger. And I yelled at them. I'm not going to yell at you guys now, but basically I yelled, "Quiet, all of you, or do I need to get your principal to tell you that?" Now the room fell silent, and this row of shocked little faces all turned to look at me because cool, calm, collected Debbie had lost it on them. Oh gosh, the fun just fizzled right out of the room, I gotta tell you. And getting them to interact now was like pulling teeth. Everybody's all sitting there prim and proper and actually going to the other extreme. And I couldn't wait for that session to end. So then on the way back to my office, which was like over an hour away from that school, I sat there and I replayed it. I thought about it and I focused on, okay, so what am I meant to learn from this? Because it was a terrible situation. And all of a sudden I realized that I had pulled out a tool one of my teachers used to use. Now, this particular teacher would actually break rulers on the desk by narrowly missing kids' fingers. In fact, one time it was my fingers. I was obviously one of the kids talking that wouldn't listen to him. And I hated when he did this because I was an anxious kid and it would put my heart up into my throat and then I couldn't concentrate for the rest of the class. And yeah, it just wasn't good for me. I never in a million years would have thought that I would use it, but I had. And then when it didn't work, I got even angrier and I pulled out another punishment tool that most of us are pretty familiar with, which is threatening to call the principal. Yikes. Talk about damaging this respectful relationship that I had been working so hard to build with these kids, not to mention modeling the exact opposite of what I was trying to teach them. So it was a pretty good learning day for me. It takes a lot of time and consistent energy to change your default, especially when punishment is still being modeled all around you. So start by becoming self-aware, like that dad did in my previous story. And then allow yourself to open up to new ideas. Few people will pick up new tools in times of stress, so practice using these tools when things are going well. You'll still flip back to your old ways when you're pushed, but with time and practice, this too will change. Secret number 4, emotions when disciplining are like fuel to a fire. Even though you've made the conscious decision to use discipline rather than punishment, and even though you've learned tools and strategies to do this, when people are pushing your buttons and your stress level is already maxed, you are likely to overreact. Strong emotions are like dumping fuel all over your punishment default, and then, without thinking, lighting a match. This does not mean you should never again feel emotion. That's what makes you human. It does mean that when you are in a heightened emotional state, as in angry, embarrassed, afraid, hurt, those kinds of things, be aware that you are much more likely to reach for a tool that matches how you're feeling. The greater the emotion involved, the stronger the punishment is likely to be. This is why discipline must be delivered by a calm, controlled adult. When you're hurt, angry, or embarrassed, it is common to strike out at others. It's not that you're a bad person or that your evil ancestor has momentarily taken over your body. You're in the grip of emotion, and rational thought is next to impossible when you're in this position. Mistakes are always an opportunity to grow. So when this happens, forgive yourself, apologize if needed, and move on. If the consequence that you gave out in your moment of intense emotion makes any sense at all, leave it in place. It is your overreaction you're apologizing for, not the correction. One trick to avoid this happening is to have an adult timeout policy and then use it when you can feel your emotions escalating. Say something like, you know what? I'm so angry right now, I can't even deal with this. I'm going to take a few minutes to calm down before finishing this discussion. You can sit in that chair till I get back. Now, interestingly, even if you don't tell them what to do during that time, like sit in that chair, many kids share that this time while they wait for their parent to deal out the consequence is often the worst part of the whole ordeal. Having them wait there is where some of the really deep thinking about their behavior can happen. And ultimately, that's what discipline is all about. Secret number 5, discipline is a proactive strategy and works best when planned in advance. Have you ever noticed that you are less likely to overreact to other people when you've given some thought to how things might go in advance? Typically, this kind of planning occurs before an interaction that you know could get emotional, or when you know you need to confront somebody and you aren't sure how they're going to respond. I remember when I first started running parent education sessions, one of my biggest fears was that someone would angrily challenge me on spankings. Now, I had been provided with a way to deal with this by the woman who taught me to use empowerment circles, but while her response made logical sense, it didn't really fit as the best reason for me. Now, sure enough, because we attract these things to us, I ended up being challenged on this. And the first time, the only thing that saved me was that I had a plan. I used what I'd been taught, and while I didn't really like it, I was able to stay calm and composed, and that earned some respect from the moms in the church group that were challenging me. It also resulted in a rather remarkable sharing by one of the moms the next week, which helped us to go deeper into this topic. So it got easier from there. And then one evening at a school, I was challenged again. And this time, a really great explanation on the topic fell into place. And it's just never come up for me since. So it might seem impossible to plan for every mistake, challenge, or offensive situation with your child, but in reality, all you need are some general guidelines to follow in situations that could be problematic. It's about predicting those trouble spots. The process I teach is very simple, and yet it's one that many parents tell me has helped them the most, not just with their kids, but also with their colleagues, their neighbors, and so on. So in the end, discipline is a mindset that can help you reconnect with your parenting goals and model behaviors you feel are important for your child to learn. It is a decision that requires you to really bring out the best in yourself before you can bring out the best in your child. It's not always easy, but being a vibrant, powerful mom rarely is. When you become aware of why things challenge you and refuse to take them personally, it becomes easier to enjoy the experience and rise to the challenge. In the end, discipline provides an opportunity for everyone to grow, which to me is what parenting is really about. If you want more information on this topic, I've written an e-booklet called I Don't Want to Punish My Child, But What Else Can I Do?, which is available on Kindle or as a PDF. And I've also recorded a couple teleseminars back in the day before I did podcasts. So you can find those in my website store, or even better, check out my Sisterhood for Vibrant, Powerful Moms, where we actually create new discipline tools on the spot. With much respect for you and the journey you are on, this is Debbie Pokornik wishing you a vibrant and powerful day.
You've been listening to Vibrant, Powerful Moms with host Debbie Pokornik. If you've enjoyed this show, please give us a shout out and leave us a positive review. To find out more about Debbie and her sisterhood of Vibrant, Powerful Moms, visit empoweringenergy.com. That's empowering with letters NRG.com.